gifted leader or social outcast? How do you define the threshold between devotional authenticity and potentially delusional self-isolation when you're bound by the limitations of your own perception? How do we challenge that secret, special, spiritual story that you are indeed more awakened, more conscious, and more spiritually developed than your ignorant family and friends? Because this is the central question that we're going to talk about today. Are you the spiritual lone wolf who is devoted in their reverence and relationship to God in all actions and all intentions, or are you more like the adult equivalent of the awkward, socially unacceptable child who didn't learn how to play in the sandbox with the other children, and now you've got a spiritual lingo to wrap around your dysfunction and wounding? This is the central question. Of course, these are the polarities and the truth is somewhere in between. But today we're going to be discussing how to identify the best elements, the golden lessons of the spiritual lone wolf story without taking on all of that delusional, grandiose, unnecessarily self-isolating energy, which is unfortunately a common trap for most people on their spiritual or even just self-healing journey. And the reason that we're having this conversation today is because of this wonderful question by Floor. Let me read it for you. We'll start at the very end and then we'll work up. So at the very bottom of this question, as you can see, Floor asked me how to prevent nihilism and enjoy the simple routine of daily interactions when there's no joy to be found. Can a human live as a lone wolf forever? So that's why we're doing this. But also at the top, she asks, or rather states, that rising the quality of my consciousness is slowly helping my healing and understanding. However, I found myself unable to function well on a surface level with people. It feels like I can x-ray them and find myself unwilling to interact because I can sense them as troublesome. I live by misunderstood and disconnected from the common daily realities. Well, I think we're getting the essence of this question. What do we do? What do we do when we're at a certain stage of awareness where we've done some of our trauma work, we have had a revelation or two, and metaphorically speaking, we have been touched on the nose by God, and now we are awash with spiritual energies, and the whole normal world around us seems rather dull and misunderstanding and potentially hostile and transparent, all at the same time. This is a really common question that I receive in one way or another, and I hope that this video is really going to give you the genuine discernment to be able to know if you are meant to be a spiritual lone wolf for an extended season of your life, or if you're actually avoiding some responsibility, and it's more of a trauma wound, like I said, of the little child who now has a spiritual lingo and you're not integrating in society, and your friendships and family connections are unnecessarily bleeding into dissolution. Let's get it really simple. Ultimately, I'm not going to make the decision for you. No one can make this decision for you, but I want you to at least make the decision. You need to decide if you are truly meant to be somebody who lives a whole lone wolf lifestyle, because I used to believe this for myself until the moment that I realized, actually, it's just that I don't want to be a part of this pack. I didn't want to be a part of the pack that I grew up with. I didn't enjoy the culture, the climate, the intellectual negativity of the environment that I grew up in. I don't need to go into too much of my story, but you can probably tell from watching my videos, I am particularly directional when it comes to establishing something like a moral framework and a sense of mission, and I want to follow that through. So when you're breaking away from the pack, when you're amongst the other wolves and they're biting and yapping, and maybe you've got the old wolf that's kind of bearing down on you, and the young, distracting, maybe very attractive female wolves that you're chasing their tail, quite literally, what do you do when you decide, wow, spiritual awakening, It's time to go my own way and follow my wolf trail towards the happy ever after. You accept that it's a season in your life. That's the number one thing that I would like to reflect. Floor's asking me ultimately the question of what do you do when you have gained enough knowledge and enough awareness to be able to see through the performances and tap into the energies that you no longer want to be a part of. Well, actually the healthy choice for most people is to leave. For a period of time you go off on your spiritual lone wolf journey, but this should be a period of time. For myself personally, I took about 2 years after the end of my university experience, which was incredibly rewarding on the external sense. I got the top grades and I had the opportunities with the awards and the scholarships. Internally, I was completely bereft and I was rather disgruntled in my soul, so I decided if I'm not going to kill myself, I might as well go and experience something different and do manual labor. For me, that was the experience of my lone wolfy journey, but of course it's just a story. I wasn't actually a lone wolf. The trap of the spiritual lone wolf is thinking that just because they experience the privacy of their soul or their intention or their very special thoughts and connection with God, that they're somehow disconnected or not embedded in a culture around them. Even when I was in the backpacker days, I would always be staying with a family or in a small community, some kind of off-grid location, or maybe just a house in a small village, and there would be responsibilities as part of that volunteering lifestyle. Sure, I maybe had some private thoughts and private beliefs and I was going through my own healing work behind the scenes, but you're always embedded. The spiritual lone wolf isn't really a true concept, because you can't be a lone wolf in a pack society. The very fact that you can receive my words into your ears and you can see me with your eyes is because we are part of a society and there are more servants that wait on man than we will ever be aware of. I think that's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. If only man were to realize how many people support his journey. Of course, dated language, but it's the same for women. The internet, YouTube as a platform, the person, the team, the thousands of people that made this Sony camera. That's not a plug for Sony, it's just the camera that I use. Literally thousands of people. And the same with a book. Here we go. What book are we going for? That book. I was going to pick out a different book. Book like Ego and the Dynamic Ground. I just picked it out because it's there and it's blue and it caught my eye and maybe I'm wearing blue, that's why I chose it. It's not just the author. It's all of the book binding, the publishing house. I mean, which publishing house is this? We don't even need State University of New York Press, SUNY Press, SUNY Press are some of the best publishing houses out there. I'm glad that I'm talking about them. Dozens of people. Even if you're a spiritual lone wolf, and you read a book like this on your spiritual journey, and you are progressing yourself towards the mountaintop of your revelation and self-actualization, every single book that you read has dozens, if not hundreds of people involved, and so does the entirety of the society that we see around us, and it is a juvenile, truly immature mind which cannot see just how wonderfully connected we are. Sure, emotionally speaking, we may not resonate anymore with the family and friends that used to be part of our story in the past. But don't make the mistake of thinking that you're ever separate from the human community which we are blessed to be a part of. The spiritual lone wolf ultimately needs to learn a few lessons of humility, and once they've reached a certain level of consciousness development, you realize that the healing period of going alone or going off into the ashram and spending time alone, which is also very rarely truly an isolated experience. I've spent time in ashrams, I've spent time in meditation circles. I'm never on my own. You're with other people, even if you do a darkness retreat. Who set up that location? Who made that wonderful space for you to have a transformative experience in? A man, a woman, a family, a business, a community. We're always embedded. We need to truly understand this feeling, because once we get to that higher turn of the spiral, we'll realize that we have a responsibility to share those gifts with the world, which is something I talk about in this channel seemingly every week. What does Flor do? The woman who asked me this question. you have a few different options. The number one invitation that I do have for this video is to truly step back and discern in which ways are you having a potentially inflated, grandiose narrative which defends your special spiritual story. I don't want to take away that story from your heart. I don't want to deflate the importance of having a spiritual awakening, but at a certain level of logical extension, if you know that you are a soul that came here for a human experience, or let's go to the Islamic tradition, that you were gifted by God this experience on earth and you follow all of that lineage, you must logically understand that everyone else has that experience as well. No one's more or less spiritually special than anyone else. There's certain levels of maturation which do require distinction. We can't turn it into a flatland. Someone who spent 20 years in meditative practice does have genuinely, tangibly more spiritual power than someone who hasn't cultivated that in this lifetime from an intellectual, intuitive, combined perspective. But don't hold on to a grandiose narrative of, I'm the king of the castle and you're the dirty rascal, which is the equivalent of being in the sandpit, and because the other children are doing the sandcastle in a way that you don't agree with, they've got that little plastic blue thing and putting the sand in, but they didn't pack it down in the right way, and then you already know, you're several steps ahead, you can see through into their little 6-year-old incompetencies, and you're like, that's going to fall over. And then it does fall over, and then you feel fantastically grandiose because you knew the way it was meant to go, and you're the mastermind behind all of the sandpit possible creations. Who fucking cares? You're a weirdo. You're an isolated person. And yes, this can come from trauma. This can come from very tragic family backgrounds. I'm not trying to attack anyone. I've experienced some of these things myself. I was obviously also a very weird child. But if you're holding on to that narrative as a 25, 35 or 45-year-old, it does seem a little outdated. Why not get into the sandpit, and rather than standing back and being like, they're going to fail, get involved. Hey, I really love that you're playing in the sandpit. I love playing in the sandpit as well. Should we pat this down a bit to make it really strong? It's like, oh no, but let them make the mistake. They made the mistake like a child would. Ah, that's a shame. How about we get involved and do it in a better way, and then you become a teacher and a leader. So rather than having that feeling of psychological disconnect, where you're living a private reality and the world's happening at a distance and you're seeing the way that the world should be and you're scanning and weaving stories and you have all your firm spiritual proclamations that you privately nest inside of yourself, what if you took on a bit of humility and you actually lowered yourself because you're on that spiritual high mountain and realized that we can really root in with other people who are struggling, and we can give them something like a joyful experience that we lack when we're away from the world. I hope this makes sense. The spiritual lone wolf is an important season of your life when you realize that the pack that you were born into, or the university pack, or the career pack that you're currently a part of is no longer serving you. There comes a moment where you go to the little mound in the pack's kind of territory and you go, this isn't my group, and you leave. But the lone wolf should not spend more than a few weeks, a few months, maybe a few years trying to find their new group, because a lone wolf does not last for very long, and the lone wolf is nowhere near as strong and definitely nowhere near as happy or fulfilled, definitely can't have a family, if they're addicted to that narrative of their specialness and through that pseudo-grandiose inflation refuses to make contact with the other boys and girls, the other wolflings or wolf cubs. Mixed metaphors, but you're getting what I'm saying. Just drop the arrogance. Most people who resonate with this idea of spiritual lone wolf know that they have a certain level of arrogance which allows them to defend that narrative of specialness. I have been there. I used to be an incredibly arrogant person. Some people would say that I'm still an arrogant person, but when you've done a certain level of work, the distinction of am I confident or am I arrogant, am I actually special, am I discerning my gifts in a way where it's healthy as opposed to being arrogantly inflated, you will know because you can laugh at criticism and you can enjoy the strangeness of everyday reality in a way where you don't feel the need to defend your specialness. If I make an absolute fool of myself at the gym, doing an exercise that I wasn't capable for because I was a bit overconfident, and I can laugh at myself rather than getting up in a huff or, God forbid, call someone else a name or attack someone else, that's a good indication. When it comes to the spiritual life in particular, if you can truly hold compassion for the many, many follies and the many, many strange relational dynamics without being too far away, without having that glass wall between you and the world, having a healthy boundary where it's appropriate, but actively building your pack, or actively seeking out a pack or a family or starting a new pack of one form or another, and being someone who's authentic in that space, you've likely found the middle ground between spiritual lone wolf who's truly doing it for themselves, and God, potentially, many complexities, and the adult version of the weird child who couldn't get along with strangers. Neither of them work for most people. We need that middle experience. I can't tell you what that's going to look like in your life. I don't know where you are in the world. I don't know what your job's like. I don't know what your relationship status is like. But the fundamental principle is to drop the arrogance without sacrificing that feeling of specialness and the reverence that you have, the self-love that you have, the relationship with God or the relationship with the spiritual mysticism of one form. There's deity mysticism, there's nature mysticism, there's non-dual mysticism, whatever that might be for you. Do that, but hold it in your heart privately and go into the world with a smile and a sense of willingness to do the very human things that truly connect us to one another. I hope this has helped. The next episode in the series is actually continuing this exact same conversation into the conversation around hermit mode, which is similar but definitely distinct. So if you want to learn more about this topic, go join me in the cave, which is where the hermit hangs out, and we're going to discuss just how long we should spend in that cave and at what point we do start to get a little bit blind. I'll see you over there.